Hello and welcome to the European Report. Here we are in the European Parliament in Brussels, and in today's programme we'll be talking about the Middle East peace process and also discussing whether the prospect of a Palestinian state is feasible under the sponsorship of the new US President Donald Trump. And in today's programme I'm joined by Thomas Sandahl, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel, Hannu Takala, MEP from Finland and also a Spurs fan, and Alex Benjamin, the Director of Europe Israel Public Affairs, and congratulations on the birth of your new baby girl as well.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thomas, I'll start off with you. I know that you've been in Washington, you gave a talk to Congress, and you have a little bit of inside information on the new Trump administration. So please share with us how your speech went down in Congress in the States.
Thank you, Simon. It's good to be back on this side of the Atlantic. We were very privileged to be able to speak at two occasions in Washington, D.C., in the Congress to staffers and international relations experts, and also in connection with the National Prayer Breakfast. And the issue that we were raising, of course, were the troubling situation with anti-Semitism in Europe. And sadly to say, I think we see some similar trends in the US now as well. But also the situation for persecuted Christians and other religious minorities in the Middle East. We did this together with our good friend Lars Adaktusson. And what we wanted to say to the new US administration was the following: we need, as Europe and the United States, to work together on these two fronts, combating anti-Semitism, standing up for the right of religious minorities in the Middle East. And I think that once the new administration has put their house in order, there will be a great interest to engage on these two issues.
Excellent. And Hannu, welcome back to the programme. In the news this month, we've really seen the historic meeting between the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and new US President Donald Trump. In their press conference, one of the key issues that they focused on was the future of a possible Palestinian state, in which President Trump put real question marks into whether this is something that his administration is going to pursue. In your opinion, do you believe that the so-called two-state solution or three-state solution between the Israelis and the Palestinians is achievable today?
So first of all, I would like to say that I like the idea what former Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion said, that he said that it was a one-state solution and everyone have the equal rights. And that was the idea when they established the state of Israel. But unfortunately, the Arab people, we didn't call them the Palestinians at that time, but Arab people, they didn't like that, and they were supported outside of Israel, and they started to struggle against that. And unfortunately, it seems so that even though that the one-state solution is the best solution, it's a bit might be naive today, and it's a bit idealistic today. It seems so that if we would like to look for the lasting peace, we have to find some kind of compromise and try to do in some way this two-state solution. There's many reasons, and also in the Israelis, they are for that because, for example, the Arab population is growing very fast, and maybe 20, 30 years it's going to be so that there are a majority of the Arab peoples, and as we all know, the Arab peoples also have all the legal rights, take part of the elections, so can be so that if they are the majority, so they don't respect anymore the rules of the Jewish state, and so I think that now it seems that these two-state solutions, it's the realistic solution, but of course there are many things that we have to take on the account and consideration. For example, I really hope that the Palestinian sides, they are ready for the two-state solutions, that they are ready to live with peace with the Israelis and with the Jewish people, and that's of course the big question mark. But as I say, that now it seems that it's going to go in that direction.
Yeah. And Alex, yeah, welcome back to the programme. It's good to have you on.
Thank you.
Alex, really since the signing of the Oslo Accords back in September 1993, the international community felt that the solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was two states, and this is why Israel joined in with the peace process that was sponsored by the US government, including Russia, the EU and the United Nations as the answer to this conflict. But in light of recent actions taken by the Palestinian Authority to create a unilateral Palestinian state, not to enter into direct negotiations with Israel, do you believe that the concept of a Palestinian state is still achievable, and what does it mean to actually achieve that?
I think
as
it's
an agreement?
very much achievable, but I think people need to be realistic. From my perspective, the question needs to be asked, are the Palestinian Authority even ready for a state? And the reason I ask that question is Arafat used to refer to statehood as a golden cage. And they have spent decades preparing their people, and the Palestinian narrative is one of every Palestinian has a key which they believe that they can go back to Israel with and turn the key into their home, and that's going to be their state. So they're completely unprepared for a state. Every time they've been offered a state, they've refused a state. And when you perpetuate a myth that the Jewish state is somehow going to disappear, that Israel is somehow going to disappear, and you're not going to have to share land with the Jewish people or with Israelis, then it makes the likelihood of statehood much more difficult.
It comes to my mind when you said that I have the opportunity to visit it in Ramallah when Arafat was in power. I visited there with the Finnish former President and former Minister of Foreign Affairs Tarja Halonen. And we were in Arafat's office, and there in the wall there's a big map, and there is the Palestinian state, and it was the whole Israel and also the Bekaa Valley. And then I just asked that, what about that? And I think that that's against the Oslo Agreement, and what does it mean? Then his answer was asked that, yeah, at the moment we only have the 22% of our state, and that's our dream. That's our dream, So, and then I said to, the other people said that, how come that, we talk about the two-state solutions, and now they say that they only have the 22% now, and that's their dream, and the so-called president have that kind of map in his wall. And they say, okay, you have to understand that's the rhetoric. But it's not the rhetoric. That's a real challenge, to build the two-state solution. Yeah, that's right. That can they really accept that there's two states, that they don't started the war against Israel then again.
Yeah. And Thomas, I mean, here the European Union, together with many members of this European Parliament, supported the shameful UN Resolution 2334 and also the Paris Peace Conference we had back in January, wanting to oppose a unilateral Palestinian state on Israel. In terms of Israeli security, what are the dangers for Israel of the international community trying to impose a Palestinian state, and is that state achievable and workable?
Well, I would agree with Alex and Hanno that this is rather problematic. I just finished an op-ed which I called the two-state solution may be the answer, but what are the questions? And I think that this illustrates in a good way the real dilemma right at the moment. For the last perhaps 25, 30 years, the answers has always been a two-state solution. But it hasn't been clear, really, what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to put an end to the conflict? Are we trying to create better living conditions for the Palestinian people? Or is there a hidden agenda where those two issues are becoming less important, and we want a new Islamic state at any time, at any price? I think if we look at the equation from a different perspective and we say, well, what are the optimal ways, for example, to secure real human rights for the Palestinian people? What are the optimal ways to promote their living conditions? And it's not necessarily true that the two-state solution, that a state of their own will do any of those two important objectives. To put it in another way, if you ask an Iraqi or a Syrian refugee why they are coming into Europe, the way that it happened in 2015, and you say, well, statehood certainly should be the answer, but it's not. So I think that we have to be more realistic. We have to be to have an academically truthful discussion where we focus more on the questions instead of automatically repeating this mantra, two-state solution, two-state solution.
Absolutely.
And certainly a two-state solution where the preconditions are not ripe. And as Alex mentioned and as Hanno mentioned, if you create a culture of hatred where you don't prepare the people for a future of coexistence, it's very difficult. And if you have these aspirations still to say that, well, it's actually Palestine, it's all of Palestine, I'm not very optimistic. So I think this is a unique opportunity for the international community to open the box. And like Trump said at the conference, whatever the two sides are happy with, I'm happy with. But let us have a new, fresh perspective on the whole issue.
Absolutely. And Hannu, isn't one of the major problems when it comes to Western policymakers, particularly EU policymakers, that they're obsessed with the whole concept of a Palestinian state. And one of the great dangers, isn't it, that they are supporting this state at any cost, turning a blind eye to the horrendous human rights abuses that are taking place against the Palestinian people by the Palestinian Authority itself, as shown by many reports produced by the Institute of Justice?
Yeah, I would like to say that in this House we have 751 members. And let's say so that almost always about 200 are for Israel and about 200 is for Palestine. And there's something like 300, 350 is in the between who don't have their opinion, no definite opinion concerning the matters related to Middle East, and it's very important that they have the proper information what happened there. And you are right that what happens in the area of covenant by the Palestinian Authority, it's not always known in the Western in general and nor among the politicians. And it's really essential that the politicians know the facts. And it seems to me that when we live that kind of times, that narratives are more like it than facts, and or even alternative facts are more like it than the real facts. It's not so easy to to try to tell people what is the truth there. But I have to say that I really appreciate some organizations, like Thomas, European Coalition for Israel, for example, who are present here, who distribute facts, what happened in the Middle East and so on. So we really need that kind of the information here that we can make the decisions, because at the moment, social media, different kind of narratives, they are more like it than what really happened, and that's the real challenge for the politicians at that time.
And Alex, isn't one of the major problems facing the Palestinian Authority, and particularly President Abbas of the PA, is the fact that he lacks legitimacy in the eyes of his people, knowing that he hasn't called for elections since 2009, and therefore isn't there a great danger that if the Palestinian Authority do have presidential elections and parliamentary elections, then the likelihood, according to the polls, that Hamas would win and then take over the entire area of the Palestinian Authority, leading to another Islamist state like the situation we have in Gaza. Do you believe the international community, particularly the European Parliament here and the EU institutions, are fully aware of the dangers and the implications of this?
No, and it's clearly evident to me that they're not. And I'll rewind a bit. When it comes to how did Hamas get elected in Gaza? Arguably, it was on the back of an Israeli withdrawal from every settlement in Gaza, and this is how Hamas got elected. Now, the number one issue in the European Parliament, which troubles the parliamentarians, is the settlements issue. There was also a huge outcry as well over Area C, demolitions in Area C. Now, let's say Hamas were to take over the West Bank, which is completely within the realms of possibility, as you pointed out, after pretty much decades of corruption, the Palestinian Authority, despite receiving billions in aid money from across the world, have not helped their people in any shape, manner or form, are just perpetuating this sort of endless cycle of violence, as we spoke about. So they see what's happening in Gaza and they think, well, listen, at least maybe we can get something out of this, maybe we should follow their lead. Now, the problem you have there is Gaza, the nearest big urban centers are relatively far away from Gaza. I mean, you get obviously rockets into sort of some of the moshavs and some of the kibbutz, but Tel Aviv is a good 15, 20, 30 seconds away as a missile would fly. If they take over the West Bank, they are within literally spitting distance of Jerusalem. They are within spitting distance of some of the major urban conurbations in Israel. So no, they're completely unprepared for this eventuality, and it's shown by the fact that they would prefer unlimited construction in the West Bank. And if there was unlimited construction in the West Bank, and we don't deal with the issues that we spoke about before, then you're putting the very security of not only the Palestinian population in question, but the very security of the State of Israel into jeopardy as well.
Absolutely. And, Thomas, on your recent visit to Washington with the meetings with the new members of the new Trump administration, you probably have a better understanding than most in terms of the direction that Trump is taking in terms of his policies towards the Middle East. What sort of possible solutions and policy ideas is the Trump administration coming up with to deal with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Well, Simon, I think it's too early to tell and to really, and the jury is out there, what are the prospects. But let me say this, and it's no secret that I was very concerned about the last few months of the Obama administration and the international push to define the parameters of a two-state solutions unilaterally. And in this context, of course, I am more optimistic with this new administration. You can criticize the new president on many grounds, but I think it's completely out of place to even insinuate that he would be anti-Israel or anti-Jewish, which we do hear from some corners of society in the US. I think what we will see is, and we saw this in the first press conference, that unless the two parties come to the negotiating tables, there will be no solution. And there will not be an international push to impose anything that wouldn't work on day two. In this respect, I think Trump and his advisors are more realistic than previous administrations. But having said that, I think it's too early to tell really what are their game plan. Of course, I mean, on a personal note, I would perhaps not have expected the president to appoint his son-in-law to deal with the peace process. But let us watch carefully and see what will happen.
Absolutely. So we're down to last 5 minutes of the programme, so we kind of need to summarise. Hanno, isn't one of the major sticking points in the peace process is the fact that the Palestinian Authority, ever since Arafat signed that historical agreement with Yitzhak Rabin on the White House lawn back in September 1993, that the Palestinians haven't prepared their people for leadership. And they haven't prepared their people for peace with Israel, as we've seen that they have incited an entire generation on a diet of hatred, a diet of anti-Semitism, and one of glorification of violence. So how can there ever be peace if the Palestinian Authority never prepares their people for peace and a genuine reconciliation with Israel and the Jewish state?
I think that's the key issue. I remember some years ago I visited there in Israel and also in some areas where it's administered by Palestinians, with Elias Fattal, one British guy who does a very, very good job in that field. And his main idea was that education without hatred. And because more than 50% of the Palestinians are under 15 years old. So it's very important now that they can get, balanced education. And I think that we, in the European level, we have to think about how we can provide them to balanced education, because they're going to rule this area in the future. And they have to learn how to live with coexistence, how to live in peace with their neighbors, because that's going to be the main issue there. And I think that that's one field where we have to still focus more. The peace education in the Middle East, in peace education in the Palestinians, and we have to look after that all this hatred and incitement and those things, anti-Semitism, what they have in their school books and the curriculums, that it's not allowed. The European taxpayers can't, pay that. So it is the key issue, and that we have to find the solution for that.
And 3 minutes program, so I give you kind of a minute and a half, maybe Alex, to answer this question. So what policy recommendations can you give to the European Commission to start putting in place to see a successful conclusion of this conflict?
I've got 2 words. First of all, the first word is incitement, which we just talked about. The second word is accountability, which you've also just spoken about. Just to give Mr. Takalura an example, just this week, last week, there was an EU-funded cultural centre in Nablus that had a dance competition for So Far So Normal. The winning entry was called Pull the Trigger, which was talking about going out and killing Jews in Jerusalem. This was the winner. And this was funded. This is an EU-funded project. Now, incitement, which we've already spoken about. We can't have a meaningful peace process unless we deal with the incitement issue as much as we deal with the issue of settlements. That means that there needs to be accountability. What I mean by that is, right now, the Palestinian Authority receive large amounts of money from Europe, and they're not held accountable. It doesn't matter what Mahmoud Abbas says, whether it's filthy Jewish feet on the Temple Mount or whatever it is, there is no mechanism to turn off a tap for his funding, which means that they can pretty much act with impunity. So unless we deal with that, and unless the EU deals and creates a mechanism like the Northern Ireland peace process, that you can only receive funding and you can only be brought in from the cold if you're committed to exclusively peaceful and democratic means, unless we get there, then I'm sorry to be a bit of a leave a program on a downer, but any notion of a peace process is nonsense if you just focus on the issue of settlements and you conveniently sweep the issue of incitement under the carpet. Incitement and accountability. Unlock those two and you unlock the peace process.
Well done, that's a good...
Just say that we have the double standard. With some countries and with some organizations, we are very strict. But in the Palestinians, somehow always we have to understand, we have to tolerate. And that's something that we have to keep our values and and have the one standard and same standards for every organization.
Absolutely. And Thomas, I'll give you 20 seconds to sum up from the entire program. So really, what role can our Christian viewers play in supporting Israel and supporting the truth?
Well, I think we need to continue to support the right of the Jewish people to be in their ancestral homeland, Israel. And I think the sooner their Arab neighbors understand this, and realize that this is not a problem, it could be a solution to so many of their problems. When Israel, as they are today with the startup nation, a light to the nations, I think there are good prospects for peace.
Gentlemen, I just want to thank you so much for being my guest on today's European Report. Thank you. And I just want to thank you for watching today's programme from the heart of Europe in the European Parliament. And we know that the EU in particular needs to do more to examine its policies regarding Israel and the Palestinian conflict. Instead of supporting a Palestinian state unilaterally, we need to look at what genuine steps they can make to achieve peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And that means dealing with the incitement issue, as well as being accountable for European taxpayers' money. So thank you for watching today's European Report.